The first time I set my heart on becoming a data artist, I was 20 and already used to being misunderstood. In Curitiba, among the fogged pine trees and gridlocked roads, I felt like a stray number in someone else's spreadsheet, a misplaced value they'd rather purge. Still, I believed in the quiet poetry of numbers, in the strange thrill of coding colors onto a blank screen, conjuring patterns and stories out of noise. My uncle Lucas, a local architect, had snuck me into his college studio for my first formal critique. The room was a lattice of light from the high windows, smelling of stale coffee and printer ink. My heart drummed so loud it muffled the hubbub, the cluster of upperclassmen, hands planted on hips, and the professors, one bespectacled, poker-faced. The other shrewd-eyed and bored. I presented 3 artworks. Each piece was a tapestry of data, the city's daily rainfall rendered in cascading cobalt, traffic stats looping into lopsided spirals, population shifts mapped through flickering lines that pulsed like waves. The pieces were projected enormous against the concrete wall. I explained each algorithm, how the code processed public datasets, and painted the patterns I saw in my head. There was an ominous silence after I stammered to a close. Professor Tavias broke it with the kind of tusk reserved for idiotic undergrads. So numbers, he asked. Art, his mouth curled, a failed attempt at politeness. Someone snickered. I felt heat pouring up my neck. What are we supposed to feel? A girl by the radiator asked. It's just pretty graphs. This isn't art, someone else said. It's software. The words rolled over me heavy, smothering. Professor Tavias turned to Lucas like I wasn't even there. Maybe next time bring us something real, he said. Lucas tried to soften the blow after clapping my shoulder as we left. You think differently, Ottavio, he said. People get scared of what doesn't fit. But his gaze was troubled. That weighed more than the ridicule. At home, over rice and beans, I tried showing my parents. When I explained how the rainfall data made that cascade, my mother frowned. All these screens, you don't ever paint with your hands. We never heard of jobs in this thing, my father added. You want business or engineering, even sculpture maybe. I forced a smile but locked my Windows screen before they could see the swirl of code behind the art. Word got out in the community as it inevitably does. Neighbors would stop by, some out of curiosity, some with a knotted brow. Donor Helena from 2 houses down poked her head through the kitchen door while my mother kneaded dough. What is this, Dona Rosa? She asked. Your boy making those computer cartoons. Laughter followed me on the sidewalk, in the bakery line, even at the football pitches. At first it wounded, left me weepy in the evenings, exhausted before noon, but over time it burned me down to something rawer, a kind of clarity. If they disbelieved, it was because they couldn't see the truth. I would have to bring it to them so large and beautiful that they couldn't laugh it away. I worked through the evenings on borrowed laptops, hacking open datasets from the city government, writing tiny scripts on public computers at the UFPR library until security kicked me out at closing time. The world outside was clouds and rain and streets brimming with the low hum of familiar souls. Inside, the data pulsed with possibilities, a secret city beneath the city, patterns slouching just out of sight. Years passed. I scraped together odd tech gigs, website fixes, school presentations. Each dollar went to upgrading my hardware, buying 2 extra monitors off a pawnshop on Ave, Viscon de Garapuava. I applied to international calls for digital artists, scoured forums, submitted to a few newsletters nobody in my family had ever heard of. Rejection after rejection, most didn't bother replying. Sometimes the grief of it all came in shudders. I'd see my reflection hunched in a monitor's glare, hollow-eyed, thinking how much easier it would be to fit my uncle's mold, learn to draft blueprints, blend into crowds with simpler dreams. Even the city itself rejected me eventually. My rental agreement ended, my roommates moved to Sao Paulo, and I slept in cousins' basements, pretending I was just visiting. But I kept making art. My hands shook for weeks as I uploaded a project to a German festival's open call, a data mural translating Curitiba's public bus delays into bursts of color and shape. 2 months later, an email arrived. I'd won a minor award, a travel stipend, an invitation to show my work in Berlin. My mother held the printed letter in both hands, lips pressed tight. Germany, she repeated, and they pay you. For statistics. That same day my father poured coffee without a word. He didn't look up. The flight to Berlin was my first out of Paraná. I'd never had a passport before. Holding it felt like holding evidence. At the festival, I stood in front of my canvas as strangers, some craning necks, some with interpreter headsets, asked about my code. For the first time, no one scoffed. The festival director, a tall woman with a shimmer of silver in her hair, lingered after my talk. "Your algorithm," she said, "it's poetic, you're telling your city's story." I felt my voice catch as I thanked her. I heard my family's voices echoing in my head, but softer somehow, their certainty peeling away. I sold my first serious piece 2 days later. It went to a museum in Frankfurt, an incomprehensible sum wired to my tiny Brazilian bank. One success broke a dam. Invitations followed, residencies in Lisbon, exhibits in Sao Paulo. I was paid to reconstruct the pulse of cities in code and color, to show how the taxi data revealed invisible fortresses, how utility bills could expose the heat maps of suffering, how election results reflected unspoken tension in a nation's bones. Sometimes I'd stare out of an unfamiliar European window onto cold city streets and smile, picturing Dona Helena checking her shopping list beside some Wi-Fi router I'd last cleaned in high school. Time passed again in that strange way it does for the freelance and the dislocated. My Portuguese softened, my voice learned new accents, but I never left Curitiba behind in my mind. I followed the city's news compulsively, how the bus strikes gripped Santa Felicidade, how the floods washed into Capão Raso. 5 years after that first brutal critique, I was invited to headline an open-air art festival back in Curitiba, sponsored by a global data firm and the city government. I hesitated, reading the email over and over. I typed and deleted my reply more times than I could count. My work had made its rounds abroad, but here where pixel and paint were still worlds apart. But what else was all that struggle for if not this? The city was brimming with late summer humidity as I landed at Afonso Pena, the taxi windows fogged from the differential between air con and the subtropical wet blast. Arriving back at my family's house, I was greeted first by my mother, stoop-backed but smiling, hands busy in the garden. My father only nodded, neither asked about art. It was as if my years away had closed into some soft, unmentionable wound. Festival prep kept me busy. My installation would dominate the Praça Santos Andrade, a 3-story tall digital mural projected onto the facade of the old university building. Months of custom coding, endless emails, tuning the colors to match the gold band in Curitiba's city crest. The piece mapped 5 decades of the city's demographic tides, waves of migration, booms and busts, every birth and loss rendered in shifting constellations of light. The night before the opening, I sat alone on a bench by Lago de Ordem, watching the previous week's rain turn puddles into glossy mirrors. The ache of memory weighed on me, of that boy trembling before a classroom, of the years spent shadowboxing doubt. My phone buzzed. Lucas, older now, beard streaked with grey, was inviting me for café at dawn. Against my heart's barrage, I typed yes, not sure if I was agreeing to an apology or a reckoning. The day of the show arrived crackling with electricity. Publicity had circled the neighborhood. Local papers mentioned a world-traveled artist returning home. My mother pinned one article to the fridge, half proud, half bewildered. The streets thickened with bodies as dusk bled into evening. Vendors sold popcorn. A busker played an old Raul Seixas tune. I wore the same black shirt from my first critique, sweat damp and tight across the chest. The crowd gathered in knots, familiar faces in the tangles of others. I saw Dona Helena by a snack stand, Lucas smoking nervously, my younger cousins perched up front. The mayor arrived with entourage. I shook hands, barely hearing their names. I looked for my parents but saw only the back of my father's head as he drifted to the edge. A hush fell as the lights dipped. I stepped to the dais, voice trembling. Iusu Otavio, I began, nascido aqui mesmo. I want to tell you the story of our city, not in words or in paint, but in data. Every dot, every color you see tonight is a life, a journey, a secret longing of Curitiba itself. I pressed enter on my remote. The building ignited in color, cascading golds and blues, fractals spinning out on glass and stone. Patterns unspooled in real time, the swelling of neighborhoods, the echo of old train tracks, floods traced as silver scars across the city's grid. Each minute a new layering, revealing heartbreak and joy, silence and song. The data responded to the crowd, sensors picking up raised voices or children's laughter, folding it into the mural's changing heartbeats. For a time the city stood still. Thousands watched as their lives, their histories pulsed and shimmered. I glanced at the crowd for traces of the old mockery, but no one spoke, not even to joke. Hands lifted cell phones. People cried, and not all of them were strangers. After the mayor presented me with a certificate, her voice echoing as she named me an ambassador of our city's future, the press surged in a half-moon, cameras flashing. Lucas found me by the projector, eyes damp. Wordlessly, he hugged me. My mother joined, clasping my shoulder, whispering, "Agora eu vejo filho, now I see, son." Even my father, silent as ever, pressed a hand to my back. It was enough. I caught the eye of Professor Tavias, older, stooped, in a suit 2 sizes too large. He couldn't meet my gaze, but beside him stood the student who'd called my work just pretty graphs. She watched with something like awe or confusion. I realized for the first time she'd grown into a teacher herself. Those who'd mocked me now bore witness, my proof etched across the city's bones in data and light. As the crowd spilled into the breaking dawn, I found myself alone at the edge of the square. Children danced through the lingering shapes projected on the cobbles. Lucas stood beside me, finally at ease. "You changed it," he said simply, "the city and us too." I breathed in the rising scent of wet earth and new beginnings. Curitiba was mine again, not because it fit my dreams, but because I had given it new eyes to see, and in their reflection I saw a place I finally belonged.